You're listening to Switched On Australia, the podcast that tracks the opportunities and challenges of electrifying everything, everywhere. Switched On is brought to you by the publishers of Renew Economy, Australia's best informed, most read website focusing on the green energy transition, and is supported by Boundless Earth. Boundless Earth uses philanthropy, investment and direct advocacy to help Australia become a global force in a decarbonised world. Hello and welcome back to Switched On Australia, the podcast where we explore the people, the policies and the projects shaping our clean energy future. I'm Anne Delaney. Thanks for joining me. Today, something different. We're off to the Gold Coast, to the Miami Gin Parlour, which is known for its excellent Negronis, and where I had the pleasure of hosting a live conversation with engineer, inventor and author Dr. Saul Griffith. Over his career, Saul has combined hands-on innovation with big-picture thinking, advising governments, helping design the United States Landmark Inflation Reduction Act, and founding Rewiring America and Rewiring Australia. These are non-partisan organisations dedicated to electrification and decarbonisation. Saul is currently on what he's calling the Faster and Fairer tour, promoting his new book, Plug In. If his earlier works, Electrify and The Big Switch, were written for policymakers and early adopters, Plug In is aimed squarely at the rest of us, householders and tradies on the front line of Australia's energy transition. In this live recording, hosted by Rewiring Australia and Electrify Gold Coast, Saul unpacks why households are critical to cutting emissions quickly, how electrification can save us money, and why fixing the energy market matters just as much as rolling out solar panels and batteries. You'll also hear his candid thoughts on culture wars, consumer power, and why he believes we need an army of consumers ready to march on Canberra for a better energy deal. So settle in, maybe with a Negroni of your own, and enjoy this special Switched On live event with Dr. Saul Griffith.
Right back at you.
Saul, I remember reading that the reason you wrote your last book, which was The Big Switch, was to cut through the culture wars and to lift the climate conversation, so to speak, in Australia, which were pretty dire back then. Tell me what the mission for this book is.
This book was... the publisher called me. They said, we want you to write another book. We'd like it to be a how-to manual. So Electrify was, written for policymakers and US presidents. The Big Switch was for early adopters. We want you to write the book that's for the tradies and the real homes of Australia that are going to go through this transition, this energy transition, and give them on-the-ground advice on how to do it. At first I was like, I don't know that I want to do that. Then I said yes really excitedly because I thought it was going to be easy. Then I found it was really, really, really hard. Then I leaned on all my best friends, and so I called up a whole bunch of people who are actually experts. So I'm sort of a theoretical expert in all of this electrification stuff, but you shouldn't trust me to wire your house. So I called mates that do all of these various things and interviewed them. Then writing the book became easier. And then, because at the end of the day, we have not yet won the culture war. We have not yet shifted the politics so that Australia is all in on this. There's a little bit of politics on how we reform the electricity market in Australia so that all Australian households get a fair deal.
So why the householder? Why is the householder so important in this energy transition?
So historically, the logic of climate action, so the climate scientists really did all the good work, and that was in the 80s and 90s. And then they handed the solution, find a solution problem. Unfortunately, the United Nations employs a lot of economists, not a lot of engineers. And they handed this, asked the economists, how do you solve this? And the economists said, well, the heaviest emitters, which is our electricity generation and our industry, so how we make steel and cement, our heaviest emitters should decarbonize first. The problem with that is natural gas being sold in the industry is 1 or 2 cents a kilowatt hour, and it's 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour into the electricity market. And that is unbelievably cheap. Whereas petrol is 80 cents to $1 a kilowatt hour, natural gas in your home is 10 cents a kilowatt hour, and that's expensive, and so electricity can win there, and those solutions are ready to go. The industrial solutions aren't ready to go yet, and we need all the emission reductions we can as soon as possible. So I became a big advocate for, let's do the things we know how to do now that work economically for people, and that's households. It is really significant. In the US, 42% of emissions are the 5 decisions you make in your home: how you drive, how you heat your home, how you heat your water, how you cook, where you get your electricity from. That number is also true of Australia if you ignore our export economy. So we have a lot of emissions that are basically emissions that count on our budget, but are creating fossil fuels for someone to burn somewhere else, or creating land for somebody to eat somewhere else. So nevertheless, it's to say our emissions in our homes for most economies are about 40%. Small businesses, which have similar machines in their lives, cars, light trucks, cooking, heating machines, they are another 20%. So it's pretty substantial and significant, and it also gives people agency, because we're in the time where people are climate anxious. So what can we do? Well, our contribution, the decisions that you control, are roughly half of our emissions, and we can do that now. So let's get on with that, which quite frankly we need to do to buy us time for the industrial solutions to get to maturity and get honestly cheap enough that they can beat natural gas.
How confident are you that consumers can do this and come on board? I mean, in those 5 things that you identify are clearly really crucial. When you put it as just 5 things, 5 major decisions, it sounds simple. How confident are you?
When you're looking at the spreadsheet, you're like, oh, everyone's going to save money, this is going to be great, and you can imagine in your head all the children walking to school through forests safely. It's going to be great. We're going to have electric jet skis. That's what's in my head. And then you get stuck in traffic between Brisbane and the Gold Coast, and you see Ford Rangers for miles. Not to criticize you, that's also true in Western Sydney and North America and everywhere else. And you're like, oh, this is a project.
Yeah.
Having said that, I drove up here in the VW bus. Seat 7 is electric, goes more than 400 kilometers. And I've had the electric car that went 300 kilometers. I had the electric car that went 200 kilometers. I had the one that went 100 kilometers. We had one that only went 80. That was tough. But that's all in the last decade. So if you look forward a decade, they'll go 600 or 700 kilometers, and then I think it's game over. So the optimism is these technologies are still getting cheaper. They are still getting better. And it's getting easier, it's getting socially acceptable. And then the other thing I believe, you are the other reason I have some optimism. 10 years ago, can you imagine a bearded hippie filling sold out audiences 6 nights running of a few hundred people to talk about energy policy and electrification? No way. So there is some amazing groundswell grassroots thing that's now happening in Australia. I think the economics is driving that, and good storytellers like yourself, hopefully me, and that we now are a political force to be reckoned with, right? It is, it was kind enough of the energy minister to sort of call me the day before that he was announcing the batteries and sort of give us some credit. I'm going to announce this thing. Thank you for helping make this possible. There were a whole bunch of other non-profits and civil society groups that also helped do that. And so that means we are changing policy. We are winning. It's just not as fast as we the people in this room, I suspect, want to win. So now we've got to, 2 nights ago, someone said, so why do you do these tours? Why are you here? And I was like, oh, that's a tough question. And I think the answer is, I think we're here to build the army. It's we are here to build enough political pressure to get the government to actually go at the speed and pace required, and help make this a fairer, easier project for as many Australians as possible.
Whenever I feel down about the energy transition, I remind myself about the number of Australians that have actually put solar panels on their roofs.
And that actually kind of buoys me up, because that's power. I mean, literally, that's power. That's the army. That's, power going into the grid. It's decentralized power. There's so many things that for me represents.
Yeah, the Australian story is awesome. 5 years ago when I came to Australia, I was telling them stories of this magical place called America, where the largest climate bill in the world just got passed, and America's finally turning the corner and we're going to do it. I just spent 4 weeks there, and Elon and Don have gutted it all. And so now, weirdly, as all of my American colleagues are like, what the hell do we do? I say, well, I think Australia is showing you how to do it. We got our solar workforce trained. We wrote incentives that were clever, that phased out. We have 40% penetration of solar or close to it. In the US, it's less than 2% on rooftops. My rooftop solar in San Francisco costs $5.85 per watt American dollars, so that's about $9. I'm having solar put on my roof of a new garage in the Illawarra near Wollongong this week. I'll get home to 16 new kilowatts, and I'm going to pay about 75 cents a watt Australian. So literally something like 12 times cheaper. So that is huge. In America, that's a regulatory problem, so hopefully we can fix that there. But honestly, if anyone here has read Electrify, there's a whole chapter that's just basically a love story written for, it turns out, President Biden. America can lead the world, yada yada. And if you look back now, it looks like Xi Jinping read that. No, but in all honesty, in 2014, China made the Made in China 2025 policy, and they were like, we're going to dominate industrial automation, industrial robots, and new energy technologies. And so they now make 90% of the solar, 85% of the batteries. I may have those backwards. They're now the majority of the EVs, so they're doing it.
How disheartening is it for you to see what is happening in the States, though? I mean, I'll come back to some more practical.
Do you really want to go here? Can I have a double? It's bad. It's way worse than you read in the media. So just to give you my personal experience, since January, I have run an R&D company making new solar technologies, new wind technologies, new induction cooking technologies, new heat pump technologies. We've been doing that work, making valuable companies, getting the technology out there, doing that with the Department of Energy for the last 20 years. We had every single one of our federal contracts cancelled in the last 3 months. Rewiring America, after doing all the policy work, we were actually invited to apply to do some of the deployment work. So we built a coalition that included Habitat for Humanity. Some of you might know them. It's a non-profit that builds homes, and another non-profit called United Way that does sort of cost of living work for low income households, and a home builder called Prospect Homes. And we ended up getting a $2 billion contract to do the type of work we're doing in Australia to help communities electrify, and we were focused on low-income communities. The Trump administration froze our bank account twice. We spent a bunch of money on lawyers. They unfroze the bank account. Turns out that's illegal. So then they tried a different strategy, and they're cancelling our contract for Treasury. That's now hung up in a legal case. I've had to lay off about 84 people across all of these activities since February. They're crashing the satellite that measures carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, so that, if you don't like the data, just don't measure it. There has been no new project issued by the Advanced Research Projects Agency in the Department of Energy. They normally spend $3 billion a year making solutions, and they're just stalled. Feels like half of science has been abandoned in the US. My colleagues and friends, so my community in the US, are the nerds who do these things, and they're just across the board now unemployed and sad and depressed. So it's overwhelming attack on the inconvenient science of climate and renewable energy. I think, you can tell what's going on pretty easily if you just sort of listen to the second sentence in the tariff conversation from the administration. So, we brokered a deal with Europe for 15% tariffs. It was going to be 50. And the second line is, if Europe promises to buy $750 billion of natural gas. And then they've done the same with Japan. Japan brokered a deal and they'll buy American natural gas. So there is insufficient coverage of it in the media, but the silent partner in this administration in the US is the natural gas industry and the oil and gas industry. I think about how naive, the wonderfully motivated, the 1,000 or 2,000 nerds who worked on the Inflation Reduction Act, we all thought we were being so clever, and it was like a street-by-street knife fight with the gas lobbyists while we were writing that. And their revenge fantasy against us is like 1,000 times more powerful. And I'm like, wow, we thought we won. So that's the bad news.
That's pretty bad news.
Yeah, but as they said in my community, I remember I was crying about this at our local coffee joint in March. And someone said to me, because they just, there's a couple of people who read too much American news in my community, and they came and they said, so I don't know if people remembered, it was like the second week or the first week of the administration, the Secretary of State for the United States, Marco Rubio, meets with Russian ambassador in Saudi Arabia at MBS's palace, and he's the guy who kills American journalists for fun. And the discussion at the table, it was published in all the media, was, look how many billions of dollars America would have made if we partnered with Russia instead of fighting with them for the last 10 years. And you're like, so that was the headline, and then I'm crying about it at the coffee, and my mate comes up, he's like, so do you think we're going to side with the Russo-America alliance, or are we going to side with China-Europe? And then, think about that as the most extraordinary flip in policy and in national politics. It's just bananas. So, but that's okay. Russia, America, Saudi Arabia, they can be the last people burning. They'll be running expensive, inefficient economies. And so maybe it won't be so bad to go the other pathway.
So does that make what this project, which focuses on householders, which focuses on, the consumer, does that make it the only path forward, really?
I think this is good politics right now in Australia. My new theory of change is we'll save America because we'll succeed at this, and then we'll be like, hey, we're white, a little bit racist, just like you. Look, you can do what we do. That was maybe too dark, but...
Yes. You mentioned the cheaper home batteries program, which obviously you'd been talking to the government about. Do you think something like that can supercharge electrification here in Australia?
As the CEO of Rewiring Australia he's very dry but quite funny. He's like, you know what Australians like more than anything else? We like a rort. Like, every policy prescription we need to take to government needs to sound like a rort. And he's like, this is great policy, this is a rort. Get in early, get your battery discount. So I think there's some element of truth to that. I think you could have a conversation, I have a conversation. I think there is a cheaper way to deploy more batteries in some more optimal way, in some really nerdy physics sense. But I've also, in the last few years, matured and realized we're not going to get the perfect system, we're going to get the politically possible system. And so I think this was good, shrewd, popular policy. It absolutely is going to deploy enough batteries to shut down a whole bunch of coal, so that's good. People like it. It's going to socialize this energy revolution in a whole bunch of places. So I think we need to keep pressure on Labor. They are absolutely not perfect. They're still approving gas projects, but they are doing some hard yards. This was hard yards. And I've heard that 200,000 of the 1 million, they were trying to do 1 million by 2030, and 200,000 are out the door in 2 months.
Yeah. It's a Tesla big battery every couple of weeks, essentially, in our homes.
Oh yeah, and it's a way better place to put the batteries than out there with the Tesla big battery, because it helps us use the local poles and wires more. It is technically it's a good idea. And even better, it was based on the good idea that was solar. So the idea, I don't know if people remember, but in 2010, rooftop solar in Australia was not cheaper than the grid. So they gave you it was called a SRES. Some people remember that acronym, the Small Scale Renewable Energy Scheme. Is that right?
Yeah.
Maybe? Okay.
Yep.
It was a big discount. The discount got smaller every year. It's going to phase out in 2030. The idea was we just needed to get the market over the hump. It'll help train more tradies to do the installations. It'll help, grease the whole system, bring the cost down on the hardware. It succeeded wildly. They got the cost lower than we thought, sooner than we thought, and the batteries are following the same model. So it's a big discount this year, slightly less discount next year, and it'll phase out. I just hope the government goes further and does the same thing for the rest of the kit, for the water heater, for the space heater, for the kitchen, and even I think we can afford to do this for the EVs and the EV chargers.
Yeah. And Rewiring Australia has your, what do you call it? The Electrify Everything loan. EELS, I think you shorten it to. Does Francis think this is also a fraud? Because, that sounds like a brilliant idea.
Oh, this is the ultimate fraud. I mean, the biggest fraud in Australia is our, property Ponzi scheme. So sorry for everyone under 30. It's our fault. But no one seems like they're going to stop it. But so
maybe just explain what this. It's a pitch that you've been making to the government.
Okay, so I think it needs a little bit of background. So I don't know. It seems like we're in a nice piece of Brisbane where you can have a Negroni. I think there's pieces of Brisbane where it's a 4X and they Gold Coast. I'm sorry. Jesus Christ, are we that far away?
What's today? Another Negroni, thanks.
Okay, in my defense, you call anywhere within 50 miles of San Francisco, but it's Marin and it's Berkeley. Thanks. Sorry.
You're digging a hole here.
My wife knows I keep digging. So anyway, this feels like a pretty competent high end of the Gold Coast. It's the type, what I'm trying to say is the top 1 or 2 or 3% of homes in Australia can probably afford to do this electrification in cash, and it wouldn't really hurt their day-to-day operations. And they're only not doing it because they're planet fucking hypocrites, right? If you bought a brand new Range Rover last year, like the most expensive Range Rover you buy, I think is $270,000. You could have bought 2 Teslas, giant battery, huge solar system, heat pump for heating, heat pump for your water heater, electric kitchen, and you'd still have enough money left over to send the 2 Sprog to private school. So that's how much of a planet fucking hypocrite that, a luxury petrol car is. Top couple of percent of Australian homes, it's pretty easy. The next 10 to 20% probably have to do this on a loan against the house or the mortgage or refinance. They can afford it, and they know they probably have the financial wherewithal to do the math and say, oh, if I do get the electric car, I'm going to save money because driving the electric car off rooftop solar is 1 cent a kilometre and it's 20 cents a kilometre in the Range Rover.
Yeah.
25 because it's Range Rover. And so, that means you save the money and it's worth doing. Then we have the bottom 10 or 20% of homes that really, this is something that's going to have to be done through social housing. And then there's the 60% of punters and strugglers in the middle, what we used to call the middle class. How are we going to make this work for them? They probably don't have the credit score to get the access to the credit, even though it would save them, $4,000 a year. They can't get over the upfront cost problem. So we were trying to figure out, how do you solve the upfront cost problem for as many people as possible? And then, my joke is a math joke, so sorry if you don't get it. I'll try and explain it. If you want to make something seem really cheap, you make the denominator in the equation really, really big. And so our 10 million homes are worth, a lot of money, like $10 trillion. So if you put 10 trillion on the denominator, then the cost of electrification is really, really cheap for the whole country. And so these governments can borrow at very, very low. They're the borrower of note. They can borrow at the lowest interest rates in the nation. Australia invented financing to help people buy something they couldn't afford in the future. This was HEX. This was the program from Bruce Chapman at ANU. And we talked to Bruce, okay, how would you finance this? And one of the ideas that came up was, well, why don't you just let anyone who owns a property, because after all, people who own property are the people who buy hot water heaters and space heaters and solar panels and batteries, let them borrow whatever money they need to do all the electrification and just roll it over on the very, very low interest loan. They don't even have to pay it back if they want until the moment they sell the property. Because on average, the Australian properties, I love the Gold Coast. Also, okay, I can just say so I heard you say we're actually in Miami. Are we in Miami?
We're in Miami.
So I did a project when I was at MIT. There's a really dorky thing you can do where you can actually put grooves, like grooves in a record, and you can run your finger over it and make it you can make it say whatever you want. And we proposed to Miami Airport that we would cut grooves in the runway so that when your aircraft landed on the runway in Miami, it would say, "Welcome to Miami." So we should do, given that you're towing up the whole strip down here, we should do that. Yeah. Where were we?
Well, you were giving the pitch for the loan.
I mean the pitch reels.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a good rort, and because we roll over our properties every 10 years, this would actually be revenue neutral for the government over the long term. The government could play over the long term. There's enough money in our super to fund it. Australian governments love doing things off budget. So there was a lot of rortiness and off-budgetness, and doesn't cost the country money, saves us. This would save us, by the way, just for our household electrification, $2 trillion in energy bills by 2050. That's fairly easy to understand when you hear this statistic. We spend $160 million a day buying foreign oil, right? So that's what we're really saving. Our free sunshine instead of foreign oil, our free sunshine instead of natural gas. That's a couple of trillion. So this is you can make, we've been doing the modelling with Treasury. The Labor government keeps entertaining this conversation with us and threatening to do something like it, so we're still hopeful. But I think it's given, this is a nation-building opportunity that you rarely get. This is a way that, we're having an economic productivity commission again. Australia fucking loves commissions and reports. But like the Gonski report, we never do anything about it. Just while we're here, Labor, you have a mandate. You could fix public education this time around. But the real point is, this would be the biggest thing you could do for Australian economic productivity for 100 years. Just cut the cost of energy for all of us.
I'm really heartened to hear that you're working with Treasury at the moment. That sounds like a big step forward from...
Well, you're heartened because you don't have to do the... Yes. They're listening.
Yes.
Ish.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's... But then, we also help them do some of the modelling around the battery things and other schemes, and you don't hear anything forever and ever, and then...
And then they make an announcement.
So fingers crossed.
Okay. Yes, I've got my fingers crossed on that one. What else do you want policymakers, what else do you want the government to do to actually help householders get across the line on this one?
At the risk of alienating the audience by talking about America again, the problem with the Inflation Reduction Act, the political circumstances at the time meant that all of the climate work could only be done in a reconciliation bill. That basically means by hacking the tax code. So all of the incentives, and it was $370 billion US of incentives, which was designed to get 10 times that from private capital. So this was going to be a $5 trillion Australia level of effort, pretty important. But it was all tax incentives, which means only those people who earned enough money to pay significant amounts of tax could really afford to apply for the tax credit. So it was classically regressive politics, and that creates culture wars. The people in Lycra who drive Teslas will win again.
Yeah.
And we actually saw a lot of the red states, the poorer red states, swinging against this because they weren't feeling it at street level.
Was that? Oh, right. I didn't realise that because I actually thought that some red states were.
So the media wants to tell you a story about how the red states were doing great. Yes, the plutocrats in red states who knew the governor who could build a wind farm and get it approved quickly got giant tax concessions for building the wind farm. But because of the procedural thing, there was a 2-year delay from passing the legislation until the tax credits would go through a state energy office to do the street level stuff. And then once it got there, you only qualified if you were rich.
Right. Okay. Great.
So I think the super important thing to do in Australia is to figure out the other pieces of the puzzle that don't turn this into a culture war. And, you know, if we had have already opened the audience to questions, I'm sure the first 2 or 3 would be, what about strata? What about renters?
Yeah.
And that is exactly the right question to ask. And so I think those problems you can really only solve in a regulatory sense. I think you have to be politically shrewd. I think you have to split what they call the split incentive. So there's no incentive right now for the landlord to put the solar and the battery and the vehicle charger in the home because the benefits of those expenses go to the renter. I think you split the incentive, you give the landlord the rort, you give them the tax deduction, and you give the renter the rort, which is lower energy bills. It has to rhyme with incentivizing everyone to move in the right direction. Figuring out how to make sure that both parties get something in the deal, help doing those incentives. That's a big, important piece. Strata is going to also need solutions like that. And then the biggest thing of all that we need is energy market reform.
Yeah.
The market we have was designed for the early 20th century. Times have changed, technology has changed, and the design of the market is now screwing the punter.
And this seems to be one of the most recalcitrant and major hurdles to actually getting better consumer rights, ensuring that consumers can drive this energy transition. It's the market that was set up, it's the industry that was set up, and the fact that the government and the regulators aren't on them enough.
It's terrible. So this is the bit where I'm going to try and get you all to get super angry with me.
Well, then we'll be
at the end of the
motivated
evening.
in the army.
At the end of the evening, I'll be distributing a piece of paper. I wanted to put your phone number on it so I can call you when we march on Canberra to demand a better deal. So this is what happened. We used to own. Queensland. You guys are slightly different and special. So are Western Australia. You're the special children, but you are part of the NEM. But you still own your poles and wires, which is good.
Yep.
Anyway,
I'm down in New South Wales, by the way.
Okay, so you suffer with me.
I'm with you.
We had what were called the Hilmer reforms, and we had privatisation. This was meant to make more competition in the market, and the privatisation was the neoliberal idea that the electricity will work better if we have competition and private companies run it. We did that privatisation in the 80s, and you can actually, if you graph the price of electricity in Australia, it was falling consistently from 1930 to 1980 in an inflation adjusted sense. And as soon as we privatised and then did the competition reforms, the price has been going up and up and up and up ever since, for a couple of reasons. So we created these privately held monopolies that could rate base their investments in the transmission and the distribution. So we guaranteed them roughly 10% profits for every dollar they spent on capital expenditure. So we motivated them to overbuild and build systems that suited them. That was a mistake compared to the days when the city owned the poles and wires. But probably the bigger mistake was
Big mistake.
This is the big mistake was getting the second Negroni.
Sorry about that.
No, it's really great. It's I don't know, I'm 6 days deep in this, so this feels good. So when we created the NEM, that's the National Electricity Market, it's a 51%, 49% partnership between the Australian government, 49%, and the generators of electricity, the 51%. So then they decide the rules of the market, and right down to they created an organisation called AEMO, Australian Electricity market operator. They have a thing called the ISP, and they model the ISP, and they are charged with figuring out how to make the lowest cost energy system for Australia. But they only consider lowest cost up to the point that you've generated the electricity and put it on a transmission line. They don't consider the lowest cost system if you get the electricity all the way to the household. So what most of you don't realize is about 40% of the price of the electricity you buy from the grid is for the local poles and wires, and 10% of it is for the people who do the accounting and the billing and reading the meter. And this is why the rooftop revolution is so amazing, because you generate right there behind the meter. You don't need to pay for the poles and the wires or the transmission or the generators or anything. So it's delivering electricity, let's call it 5 cents a kilowatt hour, and then you're probably in Miami pay 35 cents, 40 cents from the grid. 28? Oh, you lucky sods. It's about 33 for me, I think. So right now they write the rules of the grid. These are the people that are enabling the companies to charge you extra to feed the electricity back in. They're not necessarily on board with all of you owning all the batteries. They'd like to own the batteries, so they get guaranteed 10% returns. So
And they want to make money out of the consumer resources, essentially.
Yeah. And I think this comes to what is a really interesting question. What is infrastructure? I mean, I grew up when infrastructure was roads, bridges, and power lines, and that's just how it was. But you said it in your warm-up. By the time we've got half of our cars electrified, their batteries are 7 times the size of the Snowy Hydro. We are making more substantial infrastructure investments than the corporations that are getting guaranteed 10% returns. I haven't seen anyone guarantee your 10% returns. And so we're not getting a super deal yet, and we don't even have representation at board level or voting in any sense on the governance of our electricity market. And that's slowing the transition down, and it's not giving us the cheapest energy system. You can now heuristically say, just from what we know today, the cheapest energy system in Australia comes about when you maximize rooftop solar.
Yeah.
Then you generate as much electricity as you can in your local community. So that means on the roof of Bunnings, on the church, on the surf club, over at car parks, on the school. Because again, you're avoiding all of the big network costs. That probably would have made the politics of the transition better, because the first thing we would have done wouldn't have been cutting across rural areas and pissing off the farmers. That's how it went, because that's what was motivated for the transmission companies. Anyway, lowest cost energy system, maximize the household, maximize the community, get the rest of your energy from the big scale systems, and do market reform, right? So the absurd thing today is, imagine you're my neighbor. I'm generating solar. You don't have any. We pretend that when I sell my electricity to my retailer for 1 cent or 2 cents a kilowatt hour, we pretend that it goes all the way back to Melbourne, to where AGL's HQ is. And then we pretend that electricity comes all the way back to you, and they can charge you 28 cents for it. But deep down, I'm a physics nerd, and there's a wonderful thing called Kirchhoff's law. It's going to be hard to create a social movement around respect Kirchhoff's law, but nevertheless, Kirchhoff's law is like, the electrons are lazy, they want to go to the closest load. So what actually happens is my solar goes to your house, right? I'm willing to pay the poles and wires for some money to get there, but not the full stack and all the bureaucracy that comes with the whole system. So really, why am I on this tour? To make you angry about that, so we can push the government to take 1 or 2 years to fix this, whereas we're about 15 years deep in reviews.
This is probably a good time to bring up virtual power plants. What you've been outlining is a case where there is now a lot of distrust in the energy industry, because they've been making these super profits and they had not been getting us a good deal, and they're still trying to keep consumers out. And now they're asking the consumers with batteries, with solar, to actually be contributing to what are called virtual power plants. And Saul will explain what they are. But basically, it's about them joining all of our consumer resources together as a way of aggregating them to put them back in the grid. And there are some advantages in doing that, but a lot of people don't want to join a virtual power plant because they don't trust the industry. So it comes back to this issue of trust again. Who do we trust? Well, I'm really keen to know what your view of virtual power plants are, because we're going to need them.
This is hard. I am good at pissing off people I don't mean to piss off by speaking my version of truth. So a virtual power plant exists because it's too hard to take this young lady's electricity bill and reconcile it with this young lady's electricity bill individually. So if we create a virtual power plant, we can take this young lady and her 1,000 best friends and let a tech bro who writes software for a living aggregate the value of that sale and sell it back to the grid. What I'm trying to say is it might be necessary because that's how we get from here to there, but this looks like an unnecessary, one thing I've learned since returning to Australia is we love granting monopolies where monopolies don't need to exist. So a VPP is giving a monopoly of the control of your electricity to somebody who can aggregate it in software, but we could just be reconciling. There are software platforms that exist that could reconcile this at every individual household, and you don't need the VPP. You just solve this by having rational, simple rules of the electricity market.
Yeah, right.
That's an unpopular thing, I would say, because right now VPPs look like they're doing the right thing and they're very popular with the government, etc., etc. But, if you were just trying to make the simplest system and not grant extra monopolies where they were unnecessary, you'd probably just solve it with good smart meters and good regulation.
But also a much better deal for consumers. And, I can't really think of too many retailers who were doing that. Amber is one, definitely. But, a lot of them aren't. They haven't developed something that the consumer is going to go, oh yeah, I'm going to be in on that. And the thing is with the batteries that are available under the rebates, they have to be VPP ready. So that you don't have to connect to a VPP, but they have to be VPP ready because the government and the industry wants you to eventually connect.
This is where I take back all the inflammatory things I just said. And I say in this book, because this is all about the book tonight,
okay.
It's not at all about raising an army to march on Canberra and ask for a better deal. But in the book, I actually interviewed Dan Adams from Amber. He's a lovely, lovely guy.
Yeah, he's a fantastic guy.
Totally well-motivated, super smart, understands all of this.
Doesn't come from the energy industry. He's a tech guy, so he doesn't come from the energy industry.
No, he was a hippie surfer and had a vision on a wave in Melanesia, I think. And then he's like, I have to save the world and the waves for future children. I love the guy.
Yeah.
He's my kind of hippie. And, now he's hopefully doing the right thing. His deal is pretty interesting. So he just charges you a flat fee every month, and then for his software to go and trade your battery on the wholesale market and to protect you if the wholesale market goes haywire. And it's good. So he and I, if we were up here, we would probably send everyone to sleep with a 4-hour debate over whether a VPP should exist or not.
Yeah.
But I also understand, if the government puts 1 million batteries behind the meter and you only use it to backstop your own solar and your own kitchen and you're not sharing it with your neighbours, it hasn't achieved the government's goal of helping them get off coal. So that's kind of why they want they want it to be traded in the market and contribute to backing up the grid, not be used behind the meter. That's why they said it has to be VPP ready, but they could have solved that with good regulations of the electricity market.
Yeah. Hey, I've just noticed that we're kind of probably at time. We should open it up for questions. I've got heaps more, but can I just see a show of hands just to see if we've got some questions for Saul? Fantastic.
Just sort of a complete equation, the benefit factor to the grid and decarbonisation, the cost savings to the big network. So there's this idea of coordinating the use for cheap energy resources, which is fundamentally based fleet. What's the cost saving, and if you know it, like the emission saving of coordinating those resources, so having it BKP compatible, versus if we just keep all our solar and our battery to ourselves. Like, why does the government want us to contribute?
Absolutely perfect question, super lovers. So the question is, if we get this VPP right, what is the government trying to achieve? What, in the best outcome, could it mean in terms of how how we lower the price of electricity, how we use our networks? And the bonus question is, what impact does that have for emissions? Is that a good summary? All right, so like I said earlier, roughly 40% of the price of your bill is the price of the local poles and wires. They are designed by electrical engineers for the worst day of the year. The worst day of the year in Tasmania is a really cold day in winter. The worst day of the year in Miami is super hot day in the middle of the summer. Everyone comes home, cracks a beer at 6 o'clock, turns the air conditioning on to 11. And the grid is designed to be able to handle that. That means that the rest of the year, we're only using our distribution grids 25 to 40%. So in the perfect world, if we have all of our batteries plugged in to the grid, and we have all of our, a bunch of our vehicles plugged in via vehicle to grid, then you could be using all of our solar during the middle of the day to deliver all of that electricity over the poles and wires locally to those cars and those batteries. Then they could deliver it back later in the night without crashing the grid. And, without doing a lot of math, you can do this, and you should be able to double the amount of electricity we deliver over the same set of poles and wires. And so if you double that and it's 40% of your bill, then maybe you can take 20% of the price off electricity, and that would take your 28 cents down to 22. Did that math in my head. If it's wrong, don't criticize me out loud. But that's the economic win that you can get. It's a huge resilience win, because this is how you reboot after a hurricane. All of the houses, I have an 80 kilowatt hour battery in my car that could run the refrigerator and the cooking and the lights in my house for roughly 7 days. Right? I wouldn't be able to also drive it a ton, but after a hurricane, I'm probably just wanting to feed people. We'll see. So those are the wins. Like, it could save money, and part of the answer to the renter strata question is, well, if we get this right, everyone's benefiting from lowering the price of electricity. And then, in an emission sense, this is the fastest way to get to zero. It's hard to give you a number and percentage, because if we do it right, it's all of it, which is an infinite percent. Yeah, best way to get to zero.
Any more questions? Just here in the middle.
If you had vehicles in green and using your cars with battery, would that also be part of the vehicle effect?
Absolutely. This is the promise of vehicle to grid. So the question was, if we have a vehicle to grid, so you can plug your car in at home and either it powers your house or it powers your neighbor's house, that's called vehicle to load and vehicle to grid respectively. Can that be part of the VPP? Absolutely. It could be part of a system that doesn't have a VP but just lets it happen through market rules. I can't emphasize how important that is. That is going to be the biggest battery in Australia no matter what we do, and that is enough to guarantee that our mix of solar and wind is 100% renewable as possible. If we all don't play nicely and we all get home at 6 o'clock, crack the beer, turn the air conditioning on and charge the car at 6 o'clock, then the grid's not going to work. So part of the reason to do this really is to help incentivize the behavior change, to make sure that we're parking during the day when we're at work, charging on the weekend when we're not going anywhere sometimes. But really to incentivize the big, whether the grid works or not in Australia in the future, in some sense comes down to the question, where are the cars going to be parked at 2 p.m. and are they plugged in?
Yeah. Electrifying smartly, basically.
Yeah, and the VPP motivates and incentivizes that behavior.
Yeah. Up the back here?
Why aren't we using more blockchain and peer-to-peer trade?
So the question is, why aren't we using more blockchain? And I like your follow-up clarification even better. Why aren't we doing more peer-to-peer? My tragic Bitcoin story is my mate, Red Creighton from MIT, who started one of his own coins. He was actually writing pieces of the blockchain in a lab at MIT when I was doing my PhD. And he's like, hey, I need a pizza. Do you want to buy a couple of Bitcoin for me for $10? And I said no. That is merely sort of an anecdote to say I know enough about Bitcoin or about blockchain to say that it's unnecessary. It's overkill for what you need to do this. The second thing you said, peer-to-peer trading. So that's neighbors selling electricity to neighbors, which happens naturally because of Kirchhoff's law. That is the super critical thing to get right. If we have to use Bitcoin because somehow, that will incentivize tech bros to do it, then so be it. But you could do this with a spreadsheet. And really it's just about reconciling the energy bills every 15 minutes or at the end of every day between neighbors and under the local substation. We know how to do that. And that peer-to-peer trading, in the same sense as the cars of the VPPP, and this is the theme of the night, like we are the giant portion of Australian infrastructure. This is how we're going to make the cheapest energy system that's the most robust, works for the most Australians.
There's also a trial or a pilot study done by Deakin University at the moment, which is worth looking at. SwitchedOn Australia did cover this a few weeks ago, and that's looking at this whole peer-to-peer, basically selling your solar to your neighbour, for instance, or to another family member, or to another property that you have. So, I mean, often this is the only way that we can get some of these kind of creative ideas actually accepted because of all the regulations and the I suppose the styming that happens under these regulations. They call it sandboxing and they call it pilot studies. And look, it's all this creative energy that goes into these studies. But that's probably, we all know is the direction we need to be going anyway.
Yeah, and it's very easy in Australia to criticise government, and we all love doing it. But to their credit, the wheels are moving really slowly in this direction. A woman called Claire Savage runs a piece of the governance called the Australian Energy Regulator. She's currently running a process to get everything from community groups and people like me through to the DNSPs, they're the local poles and wires and everyone else in a room. And she's created a sandbox environment so we can change the rules of the grid anywhere we want to try and experiment with new technologies, new rules, new peer-to-peer trading to, in her words, increase utilization of the grid. But I prefer the description of my mate Francis at Rewiring Australia, which is like, create the rules that keep the wires warm. If we keep the wires warm, we're going to make the electricity cheaper. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Just a comment, it may not be your area, but just a comment on what we can expect of batteries in, say, 10 years' time. And what will they be able to do? What will they look like? And I say this in respect to another disappointing Tesla owner news that they're not going the bi-directional way, bi-directional charges.
So they say.
So they say.
Let me see if we can turn this into a question.
Yeah.
What is the reasonable forecast for batteries over the next decade? And the bonus question is, discuss the politics of the business models around batteries and why no one's quite got it right yet.
Didn't I say that?
That's exactly what you said. Batteries year over year are increasing in performance on 3 different vectors. So cost, storage, capacity per kilogram, and power. Each one of those is 2 to 3% improvements every year. So that adds up to 8%, which means they're twice as good across all of those things every 10 years. So that's the compound interest on 8%, 10 years, it's twice as good. Probably means that if we're using the same chemistries and the same packaging, and a mate of mine is building battery infrastructure for Toyota, and he and I have this conversation every week, and I've got a bunch of mates in the battery industry. You can expect the 400 kilometer car to go 600 kilometers in 10 years. I think at that point, most of the range anxiety goes away. I think you can expect them to charge twice as fast in 10 years. I think you can expect them, right now, the grid scale batteries can do 5,000 to 8,000 cycles. They're the ones on the side of your house. The battery on this in your car can do 1,000 to 2,000 cycles, probably double that. All of these are pretty impressive. I mean, the battery in a BYD that you bought yesterday probably is good for 400,000 kilometers. It's pretty good. The breakthrough technology is if we figure out how to do solid state batteries, then they'll get approximately 4 times better. That means electric flight is possible. That means 1,000 kilometer range on a charge. That means charging in 5 minutes. So that might happen. Toyota is one leader in that. China is another leader in that. But honestly, this is what blew my mind. We're actually quoting on a real battery in the real world delivered to Australia on the grid right now, and the price of the battery without the inverter is $92 a kilowatt hour. So that's $150 a kilowatt hour. So you're paying $1,000 a kilowatt hour for the battery on the side of your house, but it does mean that the floor eventually can get close to that $150 a kilowatt hour. So I believe, that has to be packaged. You've got to put an inverter, so that maybe makes it 250, but and then just if you really want to, get nerdy, the value of the metals in the battery is worth about $40 a kilowatt hour. So they're good things. I think this is, here's just going to throw some crazy shit at you just for fun. BYD just announced that they want to be a completely circular economy company by 2040. That means recycling all their batteries, recycling all their steel. Really, the great news, everyone's worried about what about the battery, how do we recycle the batteries, how do we recycle the solar cells? They're going to get recycled because this stuff's valuable. And this is how we get to the mythical circular economy. Problem is, Australia is selling 55% of the lithium in the world to China right now.
Yeah.
We're getting paid once, not a lot of profit, and they're going to recycle it forever. So maybe we should think about leasing it.
No, but all that solar is coming from China or Asia. Where is Australia going to get activity going to actually create solar here in Australia?
The question is, when's Australia going to get serious about manufacturing solar and other things here in Australia? And when are we going to be leaders? And I think you've probably just answered your own question. We are research leaders in solar. 90% of the solar cells in the world are based on the technology of an old mate of mine called Martin Green, who was at University of New South Wales. So we invented the stuff. He went with his Chinese graduate students, because at the time no Australian grad student would go and work for somebody on solar because they didn't take it seriously. The Chinese grad students went with him to the Australian government, this is in the 90s, and said, it'd be great, we can build an Australian solar industry. And the Howard government said no. And so they are 4 of those grad students are 4 out of 5 of the largest solar companies in the world based in China now. So we missed that boat.
Yeah.
We could still get back in the game. The Australian Renewable Energy Agency did a sort of, maybe reasonable study that thinks if we made solar in Australia, it would be twice expensive as Chinese. That probably doesn't matter. The solar on your roof, it's 10 or 15 cents a watt for the hardware. It's $1 a watt installed on your roof. The tradie gets paid way more than the whole cost of the module. So it's not clear to me that we have to make the solar. It is clear to me that Australia has to make iron, we have to make lithium, we have to make copper and nickel, we got to stop selling dirt, we got to start selling metals. This would increase our export value by 10x. This would be how do we fill the gap in us, last night I was at one of these events and a woman, I was sitting next to a the Labor MP for Brisbane, she's probably your federal MP too. And someone asked her, when is Labor going to stop approving gas projects? The answer actually is pretty simple. When there's something that fills the gaping chasm that would leave in our export money. Now, we don't make a lot of money. We let multinationals cream most of it off the top, so that's a different problem. But the way we solve this, and to your question, is I don't know that we have to make the solar cells and the EVs, but we have to get clever enough to be really good at primary industry and the metals and the inputs. China, Taiwan, Japan, you can't make steel cheaper with nuclear power, and they would have to use nuclear power because they got too many people in too small a space. And so nuclear power can't make iron at the price of iron today. You know what can? Solar in Australia, which we can produce at 2 cents a kilowatt hour. So I'm happy if we buy 2 cent a kilowatt hour modules from China, as long as we're selling them back iron at a profit. And so that's the existential export question for Australia.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Just a question about EVs adoption in the taxonomy networks. Is there any material issues here?
So this question is great. What is the impact on the networks of the EVs? Do we know how they're going to impact the network? Wow, this is an onion question.
Yeah.
So, you think, over to you. How was your Negroni?
Delicious.
Grossly, there's two aspects to this question. There's still a lot of misinformation. Sky News still wants you to believe that none of this shit, this hippie stuff that Saul Griffith talks about will work. Part of the problem is system strength, because we don't, for the last 100 years, the sine wave, so if you turn all the lights out, you listen to your house, it sounds like 50 hertz, just a low zzz. That's the sine wave of the electricity grid. That comes from giant spinning generators at our gas and coal plants. Literally their rotating speed makes that sine wave. And when the grid operators say, oh, it's not going to work, it's not going to hold together, what they mean is, if we make too much solar, if we have our cars putting electricity back into the grid, all of their little sine waves, because they were going to make sine waves with inverters, are going to crash into the big one, and the electricity is going to become a big spaghetti mess. We now have grid forming and grid following inverters. That's just a fancy way of saying these, your Apple Watch and your Apple phone, they are set, the time on them is set by a satellite to 30 nanoseconds. That's 30 billionth of a second. We know, if you just had them set the clock for all the inverters in all of these cars, they can make a sine wave that'll match the grid. So we can do that. We're not installing those inverters on the grid yet. So one potential problem is feeding in too much electricity from the demand side, that's our homes, that will weaken the grid. We will solve that in the next 10 years, and we'll have enough of these inverters fixing the grid. The other question is an energy sense. This is really if everyone gets home at 6 p.m. and plugs in their car, what's going to happen? Average Australian household uses 14 kilowatt hours per day today. If they electrify everything in the house, they're going to need about 40. The majority of that comes from the 1.8 cars in the driveway needing electricity. And that could be a big problem. If we do good coordination of the grid, and like I said before, we can double how much power goes over the same wires, we're going to be able to absorb all of it, and it won't be a problem. If we don't redesign how the grid works so that we're doing that, it will be a problem. Where there are some streets in some towns that are already having this problem, and they are having to upgrade the tube at the top of every 10th pole. That's called a local distribution substation, and it may not be rated for the 3rd electric car that goes on the street or the 7th electric car that goes on the street. So there's no easy answer to the question, because it's highly dependent upon how that thing is rated locally. And the answer is we can make it work out. We're not on target yet because we're not biting off the hard regulatory problems.
I think there was just one more person right at the back with a question, so let's take that.
In the middle they've actually started boosting energy communities are actually legislated in their legislation as somewhat to dependent market, and what they'll kind of do is source energy projects locally, and then if they need big energy projects come together, kind of fill out. Do you kind of see that fitting into this idea of, using local wires, using local generation, coming together with your local council, say, and do these little energy projects as they come?
I'm going to try and turn that into a question. There appears to be some other countries that are doing a better job at this. The Netherlands, for example, is encouraging and legislating energy communities, using as many local community energy resources as possible. Norway's doing a little bit of this, and they're really advanced on the electric vehicle and vehicle charging systems. The answer is we're not in first place, we're not in last place, and we're not necessarily behind either of those countries. And in fact, we now have a thing called an urban renewable energy zone. It's really just a word salad to describe exactly what you said, which is let's create a sandbox. When somebody says sandbox, you're now going to hear that when you're listening to politicians. Sandbox means that they temporarily pause the regulations of a particular thing so you can try something new. The Illawarra, where I live, has just been declared an urban res, so that now means the gloves are off. We can try some new stuff. And some of the things that we are trying, including the project that we're running called Electrify 2515, is trying to do exactly this. Let's figure out how to get solar on the surf club, solar on the car parks. Let's try to get more from the community. And we should even be able to run some experiments in reconciling the bills without a VPP so that it works for the community, works for the networks, and works for everyone. So Australia is doing okay on this. Not the best, not the worst, and the idea is strong.
Hey, and now look, that brings the formal proceedings of tonight to a close. But I really do urge you to get a copy of Saul's book. He's going to be around to sign it. And look, even though we've been chatting about some of the big picture stuff, which can get pretty depressing, particularly in the United States, and you don't want to always wake up to that first thing in the morning. I recommend listening to ABC Classical first thing in the morning before you look at the news. That's what I've been doing. But I think what Saul is saying, and I think what his book does so fantastically, is it really emphasises what we can do. It emphasises what we can do locally, and it's local councils, it's local groups, it's local householders. So take some action, join the army, join the consumer army. Thank you to everyone who's been involved in organising this event, and for everyone for coming. And please tune in to SwitchedOn Australia, which comes out from Renew Economy, and our website is reneweconomy.com.au. But can we have a big round of applause for Dr. Saul Griffith?
Thank you. Straight back at you.